Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the CISO Sandbox webinar. I am Elliot Baker, and our guest today is the legendary analyst, Richard Stiennon. Welcome, Richard.
Hey, how's it going, Elliot?
It's going good. It's going good. Just enjoying the sunshine out here in Finland.
Nice to be in Finland.
Yeah, not so bad, not so bad. Well, I'll go ahead and introduce you to the audience a bit here. I know that some, if not most, are familiar with you, but some may not be. And I encourage our audience to ask questions, as this is a Q&A, and this is a truly great opportunity to get answers from one of cybersecurity's leading, if not its foremost subject matter expert. So Richard Stiennon is Chief Research Analyst for IT Harvest, the firm he founded in 2005 to cover the roughly 2,900 vendors that make up the IT security industry. We'll go over the precise numbers as the webinar progresses here. He's widely recognized, as I said, as one of the top, if not the foremost, cybersecurity industry analyst. He has presented on cybersecurity in 29 countries on 6 continents. He is a lecturer at Charles Sturt University. Richard has a truly unusual background. He has a bachelor's in aerospace engineering and a master's in war in the modern world from King's College in London. He is the author of Surviving Cyber War and There Will Be Cyber War, as well as the Security Yearbook series. Talk about talking to the right expert at the right time. Few are better equipped to speak on the emerging cyber war and its impact on us and on the cybersecurity industry as a whole, which is what we will do today. Richard held leadership roles at Blanco Technology Group, Fortinet, Webroot Software, and Gartner. And as we begin here, I want to talk about the legend of Richard Stiennon, because the legend of Richard Stiennon, as is told today, often begins with his IDS is Dead piece, written when he was essentially the top-ranking analyst for the cybersecurity industry, as I think I got this right, VP of Gartner's cybersecurity research. His, what I would maybe call Emperor Hath No Clothes smackdown of this fatally flawed security category foretold its shocking death within a year, which only he seemed willing or able to vocalize. He has a talent for seeing around corners. Richard is in the final stages of publishing Security Yearbook 2022, which is a really unusual book in that it doesn't just cover the most recent developments of the cybersecurity landscape, but it also chronicles its history in a very engaging way. He has also released a unique analyst dashboard categorizing and covering the financial activity of that roughly 2,900 security vendors making up the cybersecurity space. So, Richard, if you don't mind, before we start talking about the cyber war and the cybersecurity industry and your book and your analyst dashboard, could we begin with talking a bit about your background as an analyst? Because I think it's relevant here, seeing as the story involves you telling hard truths that few wanted to hear to powerful people in the military brass. I'm fascinated by you calling out the entire IDS category, which you might have to define for a few people here in the audience. And you did this in the 2000s. And it just reveals so much about the fascinating dynamic between analysts and industry. So could you take us through that experience and its aftermath?
Sure. And to set the record straight, I never said IDS is dead. I said it was a failed market effort and the products were useless and you shouldn't spend any money on them.
Much different.
Yeah, much different. That was Gartner's PR team that said IDS is dead. Yeah, you know, I'd been at Gartner for 2 years. I was one of only 2 industry analysts that covered network security. And I would hear from the intrusion detection software vendors who all had sensors that would tap into network traffic, and then they do signature matching against the traffic, and they would send an alert when they saw something that matched a signature. And of course, if you know about Snort, the open source IDS solution, which is practically the only thing anybody uses anymore. So it's free. It's not a product, so there is no market for IDS anymore. It was still the only other thing that you could do on the network back then. We're talking 2002. You had a firewall, and that was it. You could do IDS, and on the endpoint, you had antivirus. That was pretty much the entire security industry back then, other than encryption. And I just, for 2 years, I went around and I asked not only Gartner clients, but I would talk to the security teams at some of the big vendors that sold IDS, like Cisco, and I'd say, so tell me about your IDS. And they'd always tell me how many alerts they generated a day, millions or whatever. And then I'd say, so how many staff do you have? Oh, well, at Cisco, which at the time was one of the biggest IT companies in the world, had 4 people in the IDS team. And I said, gosh, that must be long hours covering weekends and holidays. And they go, oh, we just work 9 to 5. And I go, well, what's the point? What are you reacting to? And it turned out nobody was taking action on the alerts. They were just logging them, because logging is a requirement of any security framework. So it was a hard thing to realize that, wow, everybody's talking about this product and how important it is, and yet nobody's actually using it. So that's why I finally had my presentation at a Gartner Security Symposium. The CIO of the Pentagon was there, and he buttonholed me in the hallway, and he said, you got to come into the Pentagon, because shortly after the airplane crashed into the Pentagon, they were rebuilding all their IT infrastructure, and they were going to spend $120 million on IDS. So I walked down the hallway of the Pentagon and walked into a conference room at which were sitting all of the founders of all the IDS companies, and then up against me, the industry analysts. And I'm horrible at debate, right? I get emotional, I get flustered and hot under the collar, literally. And so it was a long debate. I set the ground rules. I said, we're going to talk about IDS without using metaphors. So nobody can bring up security cameras and bars on the windows, which are firewalls, and the security cameras, of course, are IDS. We're just going to talk about what it does and what its value is, if it has any, and why I don't think it has any value. At the end of the 2 hours, the assistant CIO, the regular CIO couldn't make it, declared that it was a draw, but the Pentagon changed all their requests for proposals to be worded intrusion prevention system instead of intrusion detection system, which was the next level of what the technology was going to do. So my only claim to fame is I got the letter changed in an acronym.
It's an amazing story. And maybe you could explain to the audience a little bit about how the role of the analyst is, and that dynamic between the analyst and the industry, and why this was such a big shock to so many people. Because occasionally you see something in the Wall Street Journal where a big time CEO will get really angry at a Wall Street Journal reporter for calling them out something. You don't see it as widely reported when that happens between industry and analysts, but you do see it. I saw something fairly recently where that happened. So what's going on there?
Yeah, so an industry analyst has to be an advocate for the industry as a whole. They can't hate the industry they're in, and they have to use their experience and the fact that it's their full-time job to know the industry. They have to use that to call out characters that are making false claims for their products, or set the world straight when they start moving towards a new buzzword, and helping people understand what the new buzzword is supposed to mean. The classic example right now is zero trust. I had my team in India survey 2,850 vendors to see how many of them said zero trust first thing on their website, and there were 188. Right, so zero trust is a fairly new strategy for approaching security, and vendors that align perfectly with it didn't exist until fairly recently. But you'll see vendors that are 20 years old saying, hey, that's us, we're zero trust. Whereas 2 years ago, we're machine learning and artificial intelligence, right? So all vendors want to be relevant and cutting edge and the next big thing. So they tend to jump on buzzwords created by quite often industry analysts. So the zero trust word, phrase was created by Forrester analysts. All the cloud security stuff that Gartner's putting a lot of effort into. They've created over 25 new acronyms just for various things you do in cloud security. But that's, kind of the dynamic. The industry analyst, speaks to end users all the time. It speaks to vendors all the time. When I was at Gartner, I probably took, 10 to 15 vendor briefings a week. And I was on the road 50 days out of 250. It was just, they're super, super busy. CISOs like to think they've got their pulse on the industry because the vendors come to them and brief and ask them for briefings and all that. All they see are emails from marketers at vendors saying, you got to talk to us and learn about our cool product. But there's no way that a CISO is going to talk to as many vendors as an industry analyst does, and to start categorizing them all without that vested interest, right? I'll look at any vendor. A CISO will say, well, no, you're too small. You're in Finland and you can't support us here in South America. We're not going to talk to you. I talk to all vendors so I can understand, what's happening in the space, and, new technology comes out of any country in the world at any time.
Right. It's such a fascinating dynamic to me. I suppose it's a little similar, a little bit to certain roles of journalism, but it's different.
Yeah.
You're being looked to as someone who can effectively make or break a vendor, whether it's emerging or established. But at the same time, you have to be true, right? You have to be direct. You have to get it right to maintain credibility of your analyst firm, and you also have to somehow be a cheerleader for the industry itself. It's a tricky path to walk, I imagine.
Yeah, and it changes too when you're an independent analyst like me, right? So at Gartner, I had all of Gartner behind me, and a vendor would be less likely to sue Gartner, even though that's happened many times in the past. But as an independent, if I came out and totally slammed a company, as I've done several times, thankfully they don't feel compelled to sue me because that would just draw more attention to what's going on. But they blackball me immediately. There are a couple huge vendors directly in the space that I'm a specialist in, the firewall space, that never brief me and never talk to me. And okay, it's, even though, at least one of them has proved me wrong by their success when I criticized their IPO. They could have won that battle if only they had taken it to the mat.
Right. So I think that also drives home the fact that while the legend of Richard Stiennon might have begun with something a bit of a creative destruction, at the same time, Richard is far more than a destroyer of worlds. Definitely a creative person, author of many books. You're also a tech founder, going way back, and you started your own analyst firm. So I think you also have a sensitivity towards what people are going through when they are running their own companies, when they're trying to get through there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Yep. Yes. I've lived it. I've actually started 24 companies, practically all of them complete failures. And so, yeah, I understand how that works.
Did you say 24 companies?
Yeah.
Wow.
I used to, when I was young, I had a new idea every 6 months, and I'm going to do this, and never raised funding for any of them because I'm in Michigan, right? Michigan doesn't have a vibrant VC world.
Okay. That is amazing. It's an amazing, wide-ranging career you've had so far. So I do encourage the audience. So we're 15 minutes in. Please do ask some questions here. This is a really special opportunity to talk to Richard and ask him a question that's on your mind. And as far as why you would ask Richard a question, I think that we need to get into now a little bit about Security Yearbook and the analyst dashboard, because tell us a little bit about what that book is and why you wrote it.
Sure. Yeah. When I joined Gartner, I thought I would have access to something Gartner had acquired called Data Quest, which I assumed was this huge data collection capability. So you'd have all the data at your fingertips. There was nothing at Gartner that I could use in a new space like cybersecurity. So when I launched IT Harvest way back in 2005, the name Harvest was incorporated because I wanted to harvest all the data. And I continued to do that over the years. But then about 3 years ago, I started publishing the data, which was in good enough shape to put in a directory format in a printed book. This is the only DRM I could think of that would keep people from stealing my data and either monetizing it themselves or putting it online for free and destroying the value. And so after 3 years of that, it's getting pretty clean, right? We've looked at these companies over and over. Every quarter we have to go through and clean out the ones that have failed. And then of course there's startups coming out of stealth every quarter and adding them. But an annual book, it doesn't have a time granularity that somebody might need if they really wanted to understand the industry. So I took all my data and put it in a database and brought an intern on who's just brilliant. And we built, using no code, a application so that you can now subscribe and get access to all the same data I do and sort it by fastest growing, either the previous year or the last quarter, sorted by the most investment received recently or the last year, sort by category, read all my reports in it. So basically a supportive app for the access you get to the analyst. And then it's bundled. So it's much like, if you went to Gartner or Forrester, they sell you seats that give you the right to schedule calls with the analyst. Same thing with IT Harvest now, but you also get the data. You may never want to talk to the analyst, but you always can if you want to understand why I categorize things a certain way, or why I don't have a cloud security category right now. You can search on cloud security because I'm tagging all the vendors that think of themselves as cloud security, but it's not a standalone market. It's like IoT, right? I do have a standalone IoT market, but that's because the buying centers are different. Cloud security, the Kubernetes security is the same as endpoint, and the VPC might be the same as the network security, et cetera.
If I'm not mistaken, you have those 16 categories, and just from the teeny bit I've been able to see in your website, would you be able to place those categories into a couple of tiers, like a distinct upper class, middle class, and lower class in terms of activity investment, do you think? Or is there many, is that too simplified if you were to look at it that way?
That's not too simplified, because I think of security in a very engineering-like way, right? With multiple layers. And there are 5 major buckets: network, endpoint, identity, data, and governance, risk, and compliance, right? And those have the most vendors. All have over 200, most have over 300 vendors in each of those categories. And then the rest of them are kind of the faster moving things that I want to segment out just so I can watch them. So operational security, security analytics, threat intelligence, email security, just because there's so many vendors that do email security, and it's hard to say, well, that's just network security. Sometimes it is endpoint and application security. So yes, that's the way I look at it. And then when I've got those 16 categories for the first time ever last year, I looked at the growth in each category. That was very revealing. So I'm finally got the data to the point where I could start having insights based on the data. For instance, security operations, vendors that sell into the SOC grew the fastest out of all the categories last year, 25% growth year over year. It's still relatively small, but that's where all the XDR goes and things that support threat hunting, et cetera. And I'm elated by that, because that means that the buyers that are spending all this money are finally, mature enough that they're building SOCs and supporting SOCs, and, starting to bump into the problem of it's hard to hire people in our SOC. So we need tools to help make them more efficient. And that's a great sign, because they're, for years and years, All we talked about in security was better vulnerability management, better patch management, better configuration management. It was all just hygiene stuff. And hygiene stuff does you no good at all against a targeted attacker, right? They're busy meeting their employees at bars and bribing them to install, back doors in their phones so that they can get access to the system. You've got to focus on targeted attacks.
Let's talk about these attackers now. We have come through exponential growth in attacks in the threat landscape, it looks like, over the last couple of years, for probably obvious reasons to many, to everyone, between the rapid move to the cloud, the distributed nature of work nowadays. Now we're facing what is being frighteningly called cyber war, and you are an expert in this as well. And I would love to hear you talk about: are we in a cyber war? Have we already been in a cyber war? Is it going to come later? What is a cyber war? What is that going to look like, and how is that going to affect us?
Yeah, so luckily it all comes down to definitions. And thanks to going back to school and having to, just be aware that Thomas Rid is out there, who's a professor at Johns Hopkins. And he's not a technologist at all, got into cyber, after I started at King's College. And he came from a historian's perspective, right? And an historian of warfare and law of armed conflict takes a very Clausewitzian approach to warfare, right? Warfare is this, and anything else is not warfare. So there's no such thing as a trade war or a war of words. Those are all just, linguistics. So warfare is the use of force, to project a country's desires and accomplish their goals. And therefore, cyber war, there is no cyber war, according to the Thomas Rids of the world, because there's no force involved. Nobody dies, right? Even though there have been a few cases of people dying because their health clinics were not operating. But nobody's targeted for death, and very little destruction other than Stuxnet, which did cause things to blow up. So Thomas Rid was able to write an entire book taking all of the same instances that I use to depict cyber war and say, nope, that's not warfare, therefore it's not cyber war, so stop talking about that. So when I wrote my master's thesis, which turned into There Will Be Cyber War, the definition is, cyber network attack and exploitation in support of a military. So in other words, if ships in the South China Sea are engaged in a battle and one side or both sides use cyber attacks to get the upper hand in that battle, that is most assuredly cyber war. So then you take that and the expectation was, as we built up to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, the expectation was that that Russia would follow very, very traditional military progression, just almost an extension of what we used to do, and both sides did in World War I, right? So everybody's lined up on either side of a no man's land, and before you send your infantry in, you launch a barrage of shelling in order to try and kill the people in the trenches ahead of you. And then you'd let up the barrage so that your people could pass forward. And the idea was, what should have been the traditional way of thinking is, before you invade Ukraine, you completely debilitate their communications and their power grid, shut down their gas pumps so they can't fill up their vehicles, all the rest of that stuff, right? It just makes so much sense to everybody. And yet Russia didn't do that at all, right? They engaged in some minor wiper attacks against Ukrainian systems, where they used, a worm-like attack to wipe a lot of disks, similar to NotPetya, but certainly not as extensive. They defaced websites, just like Russia did in Georgia and Estonia in 2007 and 2008. it didn't feel like cyber war. And then after the actual war started, you had Anonymous declaring war on Russia, cyber war on Russia, and is defacing websites and leaking data from the Ministry of Defense warfare? No, that's information operations at its best. So, from a purely academic standpoint, we're not at cyber war with Russia, and even Ukraine's not at cyber war with Russia. They're literally at war with Russia, no question about that. So I think we're still to see two nations with sophisticated cyber attack capabilities actually engaging in warfare, and it's not going to happen until it's China versus Russia, or China versus the US, or Russia versus the US and some NATO countries. So that's where we stand today, I think.
Boy, I wish I would have spoken so much at the beginning and just launched right into this, because I had so many questions. In the time we have left here in our first half hour, whatever it's called, cyber war or some kind of a spillover from I think the term's kinetic war, is there anything that you anticipate seeing impact the industry, impact the way that the industry behaves, the way that the investments pouring into the industry?
Yeah, a whole bunch of things are impacting the industry. First of all, the number one driver for the industry is threat actors. And that's why this industry is different from all the rest of technology, which is driven by, faster and cheaper and lighter, et cetera. In security, you've got an outside actor who is pushing the envelope all the time. So you throw up some good defense, they come up with a new way to get around it, and it just goes on and on and on. Therefore, the industry is not going to consolidate. There will always be more security vendors. And there'll always be a need for doing things more securely. But what does happen every time there's a major successful attack, even though, here in the US, a pipeline company suffered ransomware, right? It was, all that indicates is most companies, especially in the US, are horribly prepared to do anything when it comes to backup and recovery and update their antivirus system and all the rest, right? It's just, all it's saying is, well, nobody's been listening to me for 25 years. But the government start to get involved, and they start to message around it. And so when you have President Biden issue an executive order that basically is very prescriptive for government agencies that they will use multi-factor authentication. Hey, finally, it's literally 25 years since Richard Clark first said that when he was in the government. And you will use zero trust strategies or approaches. You will encrypt data, all the stuff, which is security 101. But for the government to tell, for the executive office to tell, the biggest employer outside of China, the military and the federal agencies, to do something about it is a big deal. That means more spending. They're going to spend more money. All their money goes to McAfee and Symantec and IBM and big companies, but that means that there'll be other companies that will get some of the windfall from that spending as well. And it means regulations will follow afterwards too, to help enforce some of this. And regulations are the other big driver for a lot of spending, because a lot of companies don't care that they're not secure and attackers can steal their stuff. They really don't care, but they do care when the lawyers come knocking and demonstrate that they weren't following best practices. So then they'll spend money.
Yeah, boy, when you map out an industry and the cash flows within the industry the way that you have, I'm sure that you're able to, and when you can start to see kind of the big disruption drivers on the horizon, be it pestilence, plague, famine, war, whatever it is going on here, or just a breakthrough innovation. I can only imagine that you might have a couple things that you think, ooh, that's something that people should really keep an eye on as a real opportunity to invest in. Is there anything that you think, is there a category or a company or anything that you're seeing that is underinvested, given all these different levers that are out there?
I think for sure right now, API security is the one that stands out the most to me. Because whenever there's a new technology that gets widely deployed before people come back and start thinking about the security of it, that's an opportunity because you have to move fast and so the industry will spend a lot of money patching and fixing the way they've deployed APIs. There are 22 standalone vendors and 4 or 5 vendors that have already made acquisitions of API security technology. So I'm watching that closely. Fast growing space. There are 2 vendors that have taken huge funding amounts. They're growing, because they're spending all that money on hiring people. So they're growing quickly as well. There's numbers that say 80% of internet traffic is actually API traffic, which kind of makes sense when you think that all the traffic between your Google Maps and your phone and Google servers is API traffic for the most part. Kind of makes sense that that's all out there. So that's what I'm looking at. I'm also, the one area that I haven't seen yet so it's now a year and a half since the SolarWinds breach that involved, Russian spy agencies infiltrating a US software company and modifying their code and getting it properly encapsulated in their update servers and then shipped out to their 18,000 customers, giving a backdoor access to all of those, including many government agencies. What a horrendous, first of all, that's a sophisticated attack, no question. But it means so much for everybody because, we security people for years have said, update, patch as soon as the update's available. And I stopped doing that years ago I'm a MacBook user, and iTunes used to try and update every 6 days or so. And I'm going, why should I update a piece of software that does just what I want? And I bet you anything those updates are trying to monetize more information about me, right? A lot of these updates are, somebody had a bright idea on how to sell more tunes or movies by tracking more of what you do with their product. So, but if there's a security patch every patch Tuesday for Windows, you're supposed to update really quickly. And a lot of organizations update automatically. But what if you can't trust the updates? And that's going to it targets our trust of the software update ecosystem. And I'm waiting for somebody to go, hey, we've got a solution. We know how to solve this problem. And so far, all I hear is from companies that would sell to the SolarWinds of the world to help them do a better job of protecting their developers and their CI/CD process. Fine, but that is never going to solve the problem. You can never go to the source and tell them to change their behavior and hope the problem goes away, because you're just never going to get 100% penetration. There'll always be somebody that is vulnerable. And it could be a 2-person team creating the next really cool game that everybody uses, right? So what do you do on the end user's point? How can you cannot update, right? That's just don't update or wait 6 weeks to update. And then you'll know, because everybody else who updated faster will get hit by whatever the attacks are. And then you wouldn't have been exposed to it. Well, that's great, except that SolarWinds took 9 months to trigger. So you would have had to wait 9 months and not gotten all the new features that SolarWinds had embedded. And that's really hard. You could at least sandbox updates, put them in a beautiful environment that looks just like your production environment, and launch and test the update as you're supposed to anyways, but most people don't. But that won't detect the one that's triggered later. And you could reverse engineer the software, right? You look for changes from the last image and then try and figure out what they did. But every single software license I've ever seen says you will not reverse engineer our code, right? So the vendors will have to, change something on their code, and they'll do that because customers will require it. So they'll have to let you do something to look at that code to make sure it's not doing that. I'm still at a loss, still waiting for it to happen. But when that happens, that'll be a great thing to invest in.
Wow, both intriguing and scary, all in one story there.
That's my life.
Well, you mentioned the word ransomware. We have a question from Ashley Chapman about ransomware, and that is, do you think that the regulations that CISA is suggesting around ransomware payments will provide more insight into these threat actors than we currently have?
If the regulations actually get people to comply and reveal stuff, and if CISA shares what they learn, then 18 months to 2 years from now, we will learn more about what ransomware people are doing today. And of course, they will have completely moved on. There'll be all new actors, all new technology, and all new methodologies 2 years from now. So I guess shorter answer is no, I don't. And I'm not a big fan of the government's constant braying about we need you to tell us your information, right? Come on. The NSA is monitoring all network traffic between all people outside the US and in the US. They know exactly what's going on. So just go ask them what's going on and start doing something with that data. Don't go putting these regulatory burdens on companies that don't even have a security team. How are they going to do that?
Right. And because I've heard you talk before about the actual sophistication of the NSA as a security apparatus. And just for those of you who aren't familiar, maybe just a quick, brief mention about how surprised you were maybe when you first learned just how capable and how sophisticated they are and how much they actually do know.
Yeah, I was aghast and accused by everybody who is in the know of being very naive. And I was just, back then I thought NSA, FBI, same thing, right? Because, I worked with a lot of FBI agents who had never owned a computer, and we're talking all the way up to 2015, right? They were not chosen for their computer abilities. Obviously, that's changed dramatically. So I assume the NSA was kind of in the same boat. And then we discovered, no, there's a tailored access operations group that has published internally a now leaked catalog, the ANT catalog, of the super sophisticated things they've done. The testing involved in developing and releasing Stuxnet was astounding. And talk about sophisticated. Burn 50 days and create something that targets a specific rotator controller on a centrifuge. Just astounding. And obviously wow. That was way back in 2008. We learned more about what they could do by 2013 thanks to Edward Snowden. So that's 9 years ago. And just imagine what they've done since then.
Right. We have another question here from Jari Pirhonen, who's asking, a couple of years ago, your yearbook listed 9 Finnish companies. I wonder what's the latest number of Finnish companies you have included?
Ooh, I'd have to look it up. But
folks, a live demo here. How fast can it happen?
It's going to happen fast.
This is going to be like the new search engine. Ask Richard.
Yeah. Luckily, I just recently been searching on South Korea, so everything's still sorted that way. 22.
That was fast. 22. Yeah. A couple of years ago was 9.
Yep. Now, mind you, every time I publish my numbers, people tell me about, you got our country wrong. And I just published, if you go to my LinkedIn, I had published a list of a number of vendors in each country, and people in Ireland were pushing back, and they sent me their lists, which I have to go through, and I actually added 20 vendors. So Ireland popped up to number 2 in the world for vendors per million of population. And of course, Israel is first with 25 vendors per million of population. And Ireland and Singapore came in at 8 vendors. So it doesn't take very many more in a small country to get that number up.
Well, if we had more time, that is one entire webinar right there, is looking at the idea of kind of the central locations for innovation in cybersecurity. Because when I saw that, I didn't know that about Ireland. That's news to me. That's kind of amazing. I'm not sure what the reason behind that is, but Israel is somewhat, I wouldn't say self-explanatory, but it's not like shocking. It's a little shocking just how much ahead they are. I mean, when you look at that bar graph, it really is kind of shocking just how, and I think that these are also, from what I understand, really high quality technologies that are coming out of there too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and Israel, I explain, of course we know the mythology about their military. They have universal subscriptions, subscriptions that we say, draft.
Conscription.
Conscription. And they cherry pick the brightest math students to put them into Unit 802. So they're filtering, right? And turning out people who, when they come out, can get funded very quickly for their startups, because Israel has a venture capital community ecosystem that grew up after Checkpoint went public in 1993. So people made millions and millions of dollars, in the founder's case, billions, and nothing, pulls in more money like people making money. So, so it's always, of course, that happens in Silicon Valley as well. And there's little spots, right? Ann Arbor, Michigan sold dual security to Cisco for $2.1 billion. So now there's startups in Ann Arbor. At one point in Atlanta, Georgia, ISS sold to IBM for $1.8 billion. So Georgia became kind of the hot spot. SourceFire sold to Cisco, and now DC is a hot spot. So that's always going to be the case. Unfortunately, in Spain, France, yes, Finland, there aren't, if you think of Finland, right, the big thing is, what's the
Nokia
company?
or?
Well, Nokia, spin-offs from Nokia, but also, StoneSoft was Finland, and they got acquired. But the Microsoft acquired chat platform. So that was just a giant shot in the arm to both Estonia and Finland, because the founders were from both countries. $660 million to a little startup, and I think so. When you have technology centers like Finland, you've got all the elements, right? But you don't have the investment coming in. And that's the one element that you need to add into it. And certainly, some of the best security people I know are in Finland, and some of the best companies start up in Finland. But if they want to take over the world, they have to leave Finland in order to attract the investment dollars and scale. Besides, Finland's winters are not that fun.
Well, it was just snowing today, so winter's not over. Winter is coming.
Goodness.
Winter is always coming in Finland.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, though, keep an eye on that scrappy startup, Hawks Hunt. I hear good things about them.
Yep, Hawks Hunt, and I spent a wonderful week in Joensuu when I worked at Blanco.
Oh yeah,
which was founded in Finland, and just wow, it's a beautiful, beautiful country, and I would move there in a minute.
Yeah, well, I've been here for over 10 years now, and I love it.
Oh, well,
I'll tell you what, come here anytime. We'll show you around, Richard. It would be great to have you here.
That'd be awesome.
Hey, Yeah, it would be awesome. Awesome to have you. Hey, thank you so much for giving your time here. Everyone, please check out Security Yearbook. 2022 is coming out, I believe, on May 24th or 25th.
Yep.
Go to itharvest.com. Make sure you check out the industry dashboard. Not only are they really amazing tools and amazing pieces of reading, the value you get for these things is pretty amazing. I've been at companies where we've spent tens of thousands for industry overviews. That is out there. So Richard's really kind of doing this almost like a volunteer service is how it feels from where I'm sitting here. So
financially, it feels like that too.
Right. Well, hey, we appreciate it. Okay. Thanks, Richard. You take care, and hopefully we'll be in touch.
All right. Thanks so much, Elliot.
Okay. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.